When tech billionaire Sundar Pichai spotted his 85-year-old former nanny working behind a cafe counter in Silicon Valley, he didn't just leave a tip. He completely transformed both their lives in a way that would shake the foundations of how Silicon Valley thinks about giving back. Sundar Pichai strolled into Café Lumiere, seeking a momentary escape from his relentless schedule as CEO of Google and Alphabet. The Silicon Valley coffee shop was his secret refuge, a place where he could briefly blend in with the ordinary world. His mind was preoccupied with quarterly projections and the next big product launch as he absent-mindedly joined the line, scrolling through emails on his phone. As Sundar approached the counter, something about the elderly woman working the register tugged at his memory. Her silver hair was pulled back in a neat bun, her hands slightly trembling as they worked the modern touchscreen system. When she looked up to take his order, her eyes widened with recognition before his did. "Sundar. Little Sundar Pichai," she gasped, her Indian accent unmistakable even after decades in America. The familiar voice instantly transported Sundar back to his childhood in Chennai. "Lakshmi auntie?" he asked incredulously, suddenly recognizing the woman who had cared for him from ages 3 to 12. Her face was lined with age now, but her warm smile remained unchanged. "What are you doing here? Working at a cafe?" Lakshmi beamed with pride. "I've been in America for 15 years now. My daughter brought me over. But I don't like sitting idle, you know this about me. So I work a few hours each day." She didn't mention that at 85 she was working because her family struggled with the crushing cost of living in the Bay Area, despite her daughter's engineering degree and full-time job. After an emotional reunion that left the line of customers both impatient and intrigued, Sundar insisted that Lakshmi take her break early. They sat at a corner table, where the stark contrast between them couldn't be more apparent. Sundar in his designer clothes and Lakshmi in her cafe uniform, with comfortable shoes for standing all day. "Tell me everything," Sundar urged, genuinely delighted to see the woman who had shaped so much of his character. Over the next 20 minutes, Lakshmi shared her journey, leaving India after her husband passed away, helping raise her grandchildren while her daughter and son-in-law worked, and eventually taking this job to contribute to the household income. "Medical bills are expensive here," she explained simply, without complaint. "And the rent. My goodness, Sundar, how do regular people manage?" Sundar listened with growing discomfort. Here was the woman who had told him stories about persistence and hard work, who had encouraged his curiosity and early interest in technology, now working a physically demanding job at an age when she should be resting and enjoying her grandchildren. He thought of his own net worth, billions that had accumulated almost faster than he could comprehend, while Lakshmi counted her hours at minimum wage. What bothered him most was that Lakshmi seemed completely unsurprised by their divergent fates. There was no resentment in her eyes, just genuine joy at seeing the boy she had cared for achieve such success. "I always knew you would do great things," she said, patting his hand. "Your mind was always working, always questioning. Remember how you took apart your father's radio? He was so angry until you put it back together, and it worked better than before." That night, Sundar couldn't sleep. The image of Lakshmi's arthritic hands operating the cafe's register haunted him. He had offered to help her immediately, but she had politely declined, saying she didn't need charity. "I have my dignity, Sundar. I am still strong," she had insisted. But Sundar understood that dignity and necessity often walked a complicated line. He spoke with his wife, Anjali, about the encounter. "She practically raised me during my most formative years," he explained. "Everything I know about persistence and hard work, values that have defined my career, I learned from watching her." Anjali agreed they needed to do something, but in a way that would respect Lakshmi's pride and independence. After several days of careful planning, Sundar returned to the cafe with a proposal. He didn't want to simply write a check. That would be too impersonal for someone who had shaped his life so profoundly. Instead, he had developed a more meaningful plan, one that would honor Lakshmi's contribution not just to his life, but potentially to countless others. The morning sun filtered through the half-drawn blinds of Sundar's home office as he pored over the final details of his plan. For the past 3 days, he had been uncharacteristically distracted during executive meetings. his mind constantly drifting back to Lakshmi's weathered hands counting change at the cafe register. He had assembled a small team of his most trusted advisors, people who understood discretion and shared his vision for meaningful philanthropy, to help craft something that would honor the woman who had shaped his formative years without insulting her fierce independence. "The numbers look good," Anjali said, placing a cup of chai beside his laptop. His wife had been instrumental in refining the concept, ensuring it would resonate culturally with Lakshmi. "But are you sure she'll accept? From what you've told me about her, she doesn't seem like someone who easily takes help." Sundar rubbed his tired eyes. "That's why this has to be perfect. It can't feel like charity. It has to be genuine recognition of her value." He glanced at his watch. 2 hours until he was scheduled to meet Lakshmi at the cafe during her afternoon break. His stomach tightened with an anxiety he hadn't felt since his earliest product launches. Somehow, this mattered more than any business deal he'd ever negotiated. The cafe was quieter in the mid-afternoon lull. Sundar had specifically chosen this time, working with the manager to ensure Lakshmi could take an extended break without losing pay. He arrived early, selecting a table in the corner that offered privacy while still allowing sunlight to illuminate the documents he brought. The leather portfolio on the table contained papers that represented months of potential work, millions in funding, and a vision that had kept him awake for nights. When Lakshmi approached, she was wiping her hands on her apron. A look of concern etched across her face. "You look serious today, Sundar," she said, lowering herself carefully into the chair opposite him. "Is everything all right? You're not sick, are you?" Even now, decades since she had last tucked him into bed, her first instinct was to worry about his well-being. "I'm fine, Lakshmi auntie," he assured her, using the term of respect he had always called her as a child. "But I've been thinking a lot about our meeting the other day. About everything you did for me when I was young. How you believed in me before anyone else did." Lakshmi waved her hand dismissively, though the slight tremble in her fingers betrayed her age. "I did what any good caretaker would do. You were a bright boy. Anyone could see that." "Not anyone," Sundar corrected gently. You saw potential when others just saw a quiet child who asked too many questions. You encouraged my curiosity when it would have been easier to shut it down. Do you remember the time I dismantled the radio?" A smile crept across Lakshmi's face. "Your father was so angry. He worked extra hours to buy that radio." She chuckled at the memory. "But I told him, let the boy try to fix it. If he breaks it, he breaks it. But what if he doesn't? And when I put it back together, and it worked even better than before, you were the only one who wasn't surprised." Sundar leaned forward, his voice dropping slightly. "That moment taught me more than any classroom ever did. It taught me not to fear taking things apart to understand them. It's the same principle I've applied throughout my career in technology." Lakshmi looked down, a hint of color rising in her cheeks. "You give me too much credit, Sundar. You were born with that mind. Maybe, but you created the environment where that mind could flourish." Sundar took a deep breath, then carefully opened the portfolio. "Which is why I've spent the last few days thinking about legacy. About how to honor the kind of guidance that doesn't show up on resumes but shapes entire generations." Confusion flickered across Lakshmi's face as Sundar began laying out documents on the table. Professional designs for a foundation logo, draft mission statements, financial projections. "What is all this?" "I want to establish a foundation," Sundar explained, trying to keep his voice steady despite the emotion building in his chest. "The Lakshmi Education Initiative. It will provide scholarships, mentorship, and resources to girls from disadvantaged backgrounds in India who show promise in STEM fields, science, technology, engineering, mathematics." Lakshmi's eyes widened as she scanned the papers, clearly overwhelmed by the scope of what she was seeing. "This is very generous, Sundar. The girls in my village would have benefited from something like this. So many bright minds with no opportunity." She looked up, her practical nature asserting itself. "But why are you showing me this? Do you want my blessing?" "I want more than that," Sundar replied, sliding the key document toward her, an organizational chart with her name at the top. "I want you to run it." The silence that followed was profound. Lakshmi stared at the paper, then at Sundar, her expression cycling through confusion, disbelief, and something approaching alarm. Me? Run a foundation? Sundar, I barely finished school myself. I can hardly operate the new register system here. I don't know anything about these things. You know more than you think, Sundar replied firmly, prepared for this objection. You understood the value of education before I did. Remember how you used to save up to buy books for me? How you would make sure I had a quiet place to study even in our small house? How you would listen to me read aloud even when you were exhausted from cleaning houses all day? Lakshmi shook her head, though the memories clearly resonated. That was different. That was just caring for one child. This, she gestured at the papers, this is running an organization, making big decisions, working with important people. And who better to make those decisions than someone who understands firsthand what these girls need? Sundar countered. The foundation will have a full staff, financial experts, education specialists, administrators. But the vision, the heart of it, that needs to come from someone like you. Someone who sees potential where others might miss it. He pulled out another document, this one outlining the position that would be created for her. The title read, Founding Director and Vision Officer, with a salary figure that would likely make Lakshmi dizzy. The position would come with comprehensive healthcare benefits, flexible working hours that would allow her to work primarily from home, and a schedule that would accommodate her age and energy levels. Most importantly, the foundation would establish a substantial retirement fund for her that would ensure she would never have financial worries again. This isn't charity, Sundar emphasized, seeing the hesitation still lingering in her eyes. I'm not offering you money for nothing. This is a job, an important one. And frankly, it's selfish on my part. I've relied on your guidance my entire life, even when we were oceans apart. The values you instilled in me helped shape every major decision I've made. Now I need that wisdom for this foundation too. Lakshmi ran her fingers lightly over the papers, her expression unreadable. And if I say no, will you still create this foundation? Yes, Sundar admitted, but it won't be the same. It will be another corporate philanthropy project instead of something truly transformative. He reached across the table, taking her hand in his, a reversal of their old dynamic when her hands had seemed so large and his so small. Lakshmi auntie, do you know how many talented engineers work for me who are women? The percentage is still far too small. And do you know why that is? It's not because women can't excel in these fields. It's because somewhere along the way, too many bright young girls are told that math and science aren't for them, or they never get the chance to discover their talents because no one makes space for their curiosity. Lakshmi's eyes grew distant, perhaps thinking of her own childhood or the opportunities she never had. In my village, girls were lucky if they finished basic schooling. No one talked about science for girls. Exactly. And things have improved since then, but not enough. Not nearly enough. Sundar leaned back, giving her space to process. With this foundation, we can change that story for thousands of girls. We can find the ones like me, curious, full of questions, but who might never get the chance to explore those questions because of their circumstances. And we can give them what you gave me, someone who says, I see your potential. Let's find out what you can do. A complex mix of emotions played across Lakshmi's face, pride, uncertainty, the weight of responsibility, and perhaps a flicker of excitement. I would need to think about this, Sundar. It's overwhelming. Of course, Sundar nodded. Take all the time you need. The offer doesn't expire. He gathered the papers back into the portfolio and handed it to her. This is yours to review. Talk it over with your family. Ask me any questions that come up. As Lakshmi accepted the portfolio, their hands briefly touched again, and Sundar was struck by the symmetry of this moment. How the hands that had once guided his were now being offered guidance in return. It wasn't just about money changing her life. It was about honoring the invisible labor of care that had made his own success possible. There's one more thing, Sundar added, reaching into his jacket pocket and pulling out a small velvet box. This isn't part of the proposal. This is just from me to you. Lakshmi opened the box cautiously to find a simple silver pendant in the shape of a banyan tree, the same type that had grown near their home in Chennai, where she used to sit with him during the hottest part of the day, telling him stories as they sought refuge in its shade. You remember, she whispered, tears finally gathering in her eyes. "I remember everything," Sundar replied simply. "The foundation may carry your name, but this," he gestured to the pendant, "is to remind you that your impact was already profound long before any official recognition. Whatever you decide about the position, please accept this as a token of my gratitude." As Lakshmi fastened the necklace with slightly trembling fingers, Sundar saw something shift in her expression. A recognition, perhaps, that her life's work had not gone unnoticed or unvalued after all. The proposal on the table might have been shocking in its scale and ambition, but the true revelation seemed to be the acknowledgement that sometimes the most important contributions are the ones made quietly, day after day, in the intimate spaces where character is formed. "I'll think about it," Lakshmi said finally, her voice stronger now. "But Sundar, even if I say yes, I will need to finish my 2 weeks novice here properly. I won't leave them short-staffed." The practicality of her concern, even in the face of such a life-changing offer, made Sundar smile with recognition. "I wouldn't expect anything less," he assured her. As they parted ways, Lakshmi returning to her shift and Sundar heading back to his waiting car, both carried a sense that regardless of her ultimate decision, something profound had already been exchanged between them. A recognition that value flows in circles, not straight lines, and that sometimes the most shocking thing isn't a grand gesture, but the simple acknowledgement of a debt that can never truly be repaid. The transformation began quietly. After 2 weeks of contemplation, consulting with her family, and several more meetings with Sundar, Lakshmi had accepted the position with a mix of trepidation and determination that characterized her approach to every challenge she'd faced throughout her long life. "If I fail," she had told Sundar with characteristic directness, "you must promise to tell me immediately. I won't be a figurehead just because you feel obligated to me." Sundar had smiled at that. "The day I need to tell Lakshmi auntie that she's not performing well is the day Google starts making toasters instead of search engines." The 6 months that followed were a whirlwind of activity that belied Lakshmi's advanced age. She approached her new role with the same meticulous attention to detail that she had once applied to ensuring young Sundar's school uniform was perfectly pressed each morning. Though she initially worked from her daughter's modest apartment, she soon outgrew the space as draft proposals, curriculum outlines, and candidate profiles began to occupy every available surface. "Ma, you need your own office," her daughter Priya had finally insisted after tripping over a stack of potential scholarship applications that Lakshmi had been reviewing before bed. "You're running a multi-million-dollar foundation from our dining table." Sundar had anticipated this need, quietly securing a small but elegant office space not far from Priya's home. The space was designed with Lakshmi's comfort in mind: ergonomic furniture that eased her arthritic joints, technology adapted for aging eyes, and a small kitchenette where she could prepare her chai exactly as she liked it. Most importantly, the office included a comfortable meeting area with low tables and cushioned seating reminiscent of the gathering spaces in her childhood village, where Lakshmi conducted her most important conversations. Perhaps most surprisingly to everyone, except Sundar, was how quickly Lakshmi adapted to her executive role. Though she relied on her staff for technical matters and financial details, she brought an invaluable perspective to the Foundation's mission. "These programs have been designed by people who have never known real poverty," she observed during one early planning meeting, reviewing a proposed scholarship structure. "If we require 3 recommendation letters from teachers, what about the brilliant girl whose school has only 2 teachers total? If we demand perfect attendance, what about the girl who must sometimes stay home to care for siblings while her mother works?" Under her guidance, the Lakshmi Education Initiative developed uniquely flexible pathways to identify talent in unlikely places. Rather than relying solely on standardized testing and academic credentials, the Foundation created a multifaceted evaluation process that could recognize problem-solving ability in a girl who had figured out how to repair her family's water pump, or mathematical aptitude in one who managed her mother's small market stall with exceptional efficiency. As the launch date approached, Lakshmi found herself facing an unexpected challenge: her public role. "I cannot give speeches," she protested when Sundar explained that donors and partners would expect to hear from the Foundation's namesake and director. "What would I say? I am not educated like you." "You educated me," Sundar reminded her. "And that's exactly what you'll tell them. On the night of the gala opening in Bangalore, the ballroom of the Taj West End Hotel glittered with the combined wealth and influence of Silicon Valley entrepreneurs and Indian business leaders. Lakshmi, dressed in a deep burgundy silk sari with a subtle gold border, a gift from Anjali, stood backstage, adjusting the banyan tree pendant that had become her talisman. "I am too old for such drama," she murmured to Sundar's wife, who had become both friend and confidant in the months of preparation. "Nonsense," Anjali replied, adjusting the pallu of Lakshmi's sari with the familiarity of a daughter. "You are exactly the right age to command this room. You have earned every wrinkle, every gray hair, and every word of wisdom you are about to share." When Sundar introduced her, the polite applause was tinged with curiosity. Few in the room had heard the full story of their connection, and many had likely assumed that the foundation's name was a coincidence, or perhaps honored some distant relative of the Google CEO. Lakshmi walked to the podium with the measured dignity that comes from a lifetime of carrying heavy loads, water jugs, laundry baskets, other people's children, and now, a vision for the future. "I am not a woman of many words," she began, her voice surprisingly strong despite her nervousness. "I have spent my life in service to others, as many women do. I cooked, I cleaned, I cared for children, including one very curious boy named Sundar who asked more questions than I had answers for." A ripple of surprise moved through the audience as connections were made. Sundar, standing at the side of the stage, nodded encouragingly. "Sometimes the greatest minds are born into circumstances that don't nurture them," Lakshmi continued, warming to her subject. "A bright girl may be told to focus on marriage instead of mathematics. A curious child may be told to be silent instead of being encouraged to question. But sometimes all it takes is one person to say, 'I see you. I believe in you.' That is what I tried to do for a curious boy named Sundar many years ago, and that is what this foundation will do for generations of girls to come." As she spoke, her gaze found the table where the first cohort of scholarship recipients sat, 20 young women from backgrounds remarkably similar to her own, their eyes shining with a mixture of disbelief and determination. "To these girls," Lakshmi said, departing from her prepared remarks, "I want to say something important. You may feel out of place here, among so much wealth and education. I understand this feeling. Even now, as an old woman in fancy clothes, I feel it too." Her honesty prompted appreciative laughter. "But remember that your minds belong everywhere knowledge is valued. Your hands belong on keyboards and laboratory equipment just as surely as they belong in your homes and communities. And your voices belong in every conversation about the future of technology." When she finished speaking, the applause was no longer merely polite. Something in her unvarnished authenticity had cut through the practiced sophistication of the room. Later, Sundar would tell her that he'd received more messages about her 5-minute speech than about any keynote he'd ever delivered. The foundation quickly established itself as more than just another corporate philanthropy initiative. Under Lakshmi's guidance, it wasn't simply writing checks for education. It was reimagining how educational opportunity could be structured for girls who faced multiple barriers to accessing STEM careers. For the scholarship recipients, Lakshmi was both intimidating and inspiring. "She tests us," one young woman explained to a journalist profiling the foundation's first year. "Not on our knowledge, she leaves that to our professors, but on our determination. She asks us what we will do when we fail, not if we will succeed. And she doesn't accept excuses about family obligations or cultural expectations. I was arranging marriages for my cousins at your age," she told me when I complained about having to miss a family function for a coding competition. "If I can change at 85, your family can adapt to you pursuing your dreams at 18." Lakshmi herself had adapted to a radically different life. She moved into a comfortable but modest home near her daughter's family, finally having the space and security she had worked her entire life to provide for others. Though she had initially worried about losing her purpose without daily work, she found her days fuller than ever, divided between foundation responsibilities, mentoring scholars, and finally, enjoying her grandchildren without the pressure of financial worry. "They call me Lakshmi grandmother now," she told Sundar during one of their regular dinners, 6 months after the launch. "Not just my actual grandchildren, but all the scholarship girls. They video call me with their problems. Sometimes academic, sometimes personal." She chuckled. Can you imagine? I have hundreds of grandchildren now, all brilliant, all going to change the world. They're lucky to have you, Sundar replied, meaning it entirely. Just as I was. The press covered the foundation's launch extensively, initially framing it as a heartwarming human interest story about reunion and generosity. Tech billionaire's childhood nanny now runs his $50 million foundation, made for irresistible headlines. But as the months passed and the foundation's distinctive approach began showing measurable results, the coverage deepened. Educators noted how the Lakshmi Initiative's selection process identified talented girls who would have been overlooked by traditional merit-based programs. Technology companies began partnering with the foundation not just for positive publicity, but because they recognized the value of the diverse perspectives these young women brought to the field. Even other philanthropists found themselves re-evaluating their approaches, questioning whether their well-intentioned programs were truly designed to reach those most in need or merely those most visible. For Lakshmi, now approaching her 86th birthday, the greatest satisfaction came not from the public recognition or even the dramatic improvement in her material circumstances. It came from the knowledge that her lifetime of invisible labor, the cooking, cleaning, childcare, and emotional support that had never appeared on any resume or received any formal compensation, had been recognized not just as work, but as wisdom. You know what is funny, Sundar? She remarked one evening as they sat in her garden, watching the sunset. All these years, I thought I was simply surviving, doing what needed to be done each day. I never imagined that paying attention to one curious child would lead to all this. She gestured vaguely, encompassing not just her comfortable home, but the entire foundation and its growing impact. That's because you see people, not just potential transactions, Sundar replied. It's a perspective that's sorely lacking in my world. Well, Lakshmi said with a practical wisdom that characterized her approach to everything. Now your world has a little more of it. And soon, thanks to our girls, it will have much more. As darkness fell and the first stars appeared overhead, the contrast between where they had begun and where they now sat. Two people from vastly different generations and circumstances, united by mutual respect and shared purpose, seemed to embody the foundation's promise. That value can be recognized across all barriers, that wisdom comes in many forms, and that sometimes the most revolutionary act is simply to see someone completely and honor what they have to offer. What shocked Silicon Valley wasn't just the size of Sundar's gift or the heartwarming story behind it, but how the Lakshmi Initiative began to transform the tech industry's approach to giving. Other executives, inspired by the personal connection behind the foundation, began seeking out meaningful figures from their own pasts to honor through similar initiatives. For Lakshmi, now settled in a comfortable home near her family, the greatest joy came from video chatting with scholarship recipients across India. They call me Lakshmi grandmother, she told Sundar during one of their regular dinners. Can you imagine? I have hundreds of grandchildren now. The media initially covered the story as a heartwarming tale of reunion and generosity. But the real impact unfolded more quietly in the years that followed, in the rising number of women engineers emerging from programs supported by the foundation, in the changing conversations about who belongs in technology, and in the recognition that care work, the kind Lakshmi had performed her entire life, creates incalculable value that deserves to be honored. As for Sundar and Lakshmi, their weekly meetings to discuss foundation business inevitably turned into reminiscences about Chennai, with Lakshmi still occasionally scolding him for not eating properly despite his global success. Some relationships never change, Sundar would joke to his leadership team. No matter how many companies you run, your nanny will always see the child who needs looking after. And perhaps that was the most shocking thing of all, that in the cutthroat world of technology, where innovation and disruption are celebrated above all else, it was an act of remembrance and gratitude that ultimately created the most meaningful impact.